The last time they spoke to me like a human being was the day they thought I was going to die. "You've had a good run, Grandpa," my eldest grandson, Tyler, said, patting my hand like I was already cold. He glanced at his watch more than he looked at me. "If there's anything you want us to pass on, now's the time." They surrounded my hospital bed like vultures dressed in designer clothes, Tyler, Maddie, and Josh. My daughter stood behind them, silent, eyes fixed on the floor like she'd forgotten how to look her own father in the eye. I had pneumonia. That's all. A rough one, yes, but not a death sentence. I was 84, not immortal, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I listened to them talk about the house I'd built with my hands, the land my wife and I had cultivated for 5 decades, the antique furniture, the coin collection, the rare books. They spoke of it like it was a buffet laid out for them. Maddie even made a list on her phone. "He always said I could have the grandfather clock," she whispered. I had not. Tyler talked about converting the workshop into a gym. Josh joked about tearing out the garden for a pool. No one asked how I was feeling. No one mentioned my wife, their grandmother, who passed just 2 years ago. I closed my eyes and let them talk, pretending to drift off. But I wasn't sleeping. I was listening. I was remembering. And I was planning. Because what they didn't know was that I was far from gone. And I had time. I went home a week later. They didn't visit. Not once. But the gardener did. So did the young woman who delivered my groceries. The mailman paused to ask how I was holding up. I started writing. Drafting. Sketching out a new will. One with conditions. They thought I was just an old man. They forgot who built the foundation they stand on. And they never asked what I was going to do with my time now that I was alive again. I wasn't always this alone. Once, this house was full. Of laughter, of life, of the scent of fresh bread and sawdust and lilacs from the backyard. My wife, Eleanor, used to hum while she worked in the kitchen, never loud, just enough to turn silence into comfort. We raised our daughter, Lillian, here. We built every inch of this place together. I met Eleanor when I was 20. She was the neighbor's niece, visiting for a summer. I fell in love before July was halfway through. She had a laugh that made everything feel less serious, and a way of tilting her head when she asked questions that made you want to answer with your whole soul. We didn't have much. But we had enough. I worked with my hands, carpentry, electrical, plumbing, whatever was needed. She worked in the school cafeteria, knew every kid's name, remembered who had allergies, and who needed an extra cookie on rough days. We built this house from the ground up. Literally. I laid the foundation, brick by brick, while Eleanor brought lemonade and blueprints she'd drawn on napkins. She had vision. I had tools. We made it work. When Lillian was born, we gave her the back room with the wide windows. She loved the light. Grew sunflowers outside that window every year from the time she could walk. She grew up kind, curious, a little distant. Especially after college. She married young. Married rich. Suddenly, our ways seemed old-fashioned to her. But we were always here. When the marriage fell apart, we opened our doors. When the kids were dropped off, first Tyler, then Maddie, then Josh, we made space. Eleanor read to them every night. I built them bunk beds, treehouses, toy chests with secret compartments. They called us Nana and Pop. They said they loved coming to visit. But visits got shorter. Birthdays turned into texts. Holidays turned into obligations. Still, Eleanor never complained. "They're just busy," she'd say, brushing her hands on her apron. "They'll come back when they need to." They came back for her funeral. That was 2 years ago. I remember standing at the podium, eulogy in hand, heart in my throat, and not one of them offered to say anything. They sat in the pews, dry-eyed, like it was just another Sunday. Afterward, they asked about the will. I hadn't even buried her a full day. That was the first crack. I thought it would fade. I thought grief made people say dumb things. But months passed. And so did they. Past birthdays. Past Thanksgiving. Not even a card at Christmas. Just a group text from Maddie, "Hope everyone's well." Still, I held on. Watered Eleanor's roses. Maintained the place. Waited. But what I didn't realize, what I didn't want to admit, was that they'd already moved on. I was just a placeholder now. A bookmark in a story they no longer read. Until pneumonia hit. And suddenly, they remembered me. But not as someone to visit, or care for, or love. Just as a signature on a line. And that's when I realized, they had been raised in my house, but not in my values. They'd inherited my blood, not my character. And so, quietly, without anger, I began to rewrite the ending. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. It came in layers, thin, quiet, sharp. Like paper cuts. It started with the texts I didn't receive. Tyler bought a new car, a luxury model with my name still on the insurance, from when I helped him get his first one. I saw it on social media, not from him. Maddie launched her event planning business, using the barn on my property without asking. She charged clients and never offered a dollar for upkeep. Josh threw parties in the garden Eleanor had planted, claiming he was keeping it alive with laughter. They drank wine beside the lilies she once knelt over with her hands in the dirt. I watched it unfold from my porch. Uninvited. Not once did they knock. One day, I walked into my own living room to find strangers, guests Maddie was showing around. "We're considering turning this into a rental property," she said brightly, until she saw me standing there. "Grandpa. You're here." "I live here," I said. She laughed nervously. "Of course. I just meant, we figured you'd be resting." Resting. Not living. Not deciding. Just existing quietly, until I didn't. My daughter, Lillian, stopped calling altogether. When I finally reached her, she said, "They're young. They mean well. You just don't understand how the world works anymore." I felt the shift then, like I'd become a ghost in my own home. A relic. Something to dust off when convenient, then tuck away. They started forwarding my mail. Adjusting accounts. Making plans I hadn't approved. One evening, I overheard Josh on the phone, "Once the old man's gone, we can flip the place. Make a killing." The next morning, I called my lawyer. It was time to make things official. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. But I was awake. It's strange how silence can be louder than grief. After I made the call to my lawyer, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the space where Eleanor used to set her teacup. The ring her mug left behind was still there, a faint, permanent watermark etched into the oak. That morning, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't open the windows. I just sat in that stillness and let the weight of it all settle. They had forgotten me while I was still breathing. That realization didn't come with rage. It came with exhaustion. A quiet folding inward. Like a house slowly emptying itself of warmth. I stopped shaving. I stopped fixing the gate that always creaked in the wind. I didn't check the mail. The world could wait. Each morning, I woke and walked past the pictures on the wall, birthdays, graduations, smiling faces I used to believe in. I didn't take them down. I couldn't. But I stopped looking directly at them. I still made my tea. 1 cup. No second one now. I set it beside Eleanor's ring mark and imagined her humming in the next room. That was the only sound I let myself hear. I spoke less. To the mailman. To the grocer. Even to the birds that nested outside the porch light. The words dried up somewhere inside me. One afternoon, I pulled out an old journal. The one Eleanor gave me when I retired. The one I never used. I wrote a single sentence, "They see me as a placeholder." Then I closed it. I wasn't seeking pity. I wasn't drafting vengeance. I was just sitting in it. In the ache. In the space where once there was belonging. No one called. No one visited. The days bled together. The clock ticked, the sun moved, and I sat with ghosts of my own making. Grief has many shades. I'd known the sharp kind, when Eleanor passed. But this was different. This was dull. Heavy. Like fog you can't clear. I kept the house clean. Not because I expected anyone. But because it was what Eleanor would have done. One night, I stood in the hallway, lights off, and whispered, "Did we do it wrong?" To no one. To everyone. And then I went to bed. That was the bottom. Not a breakdown. Not a moment of drama. Just a whisper in the dark, asking a question that didn't want an answer. The morning it changed, I woke up before the sun. Not because of pain or habit. But because something in me stirred, a stillness that felt full, not hollow. I brewed tea. This time, I made 2 cups. I set one in front of Eleanor's chair, the other in front of mine. And I sat. There was no dramatic decision. No angry vow. Just a breath. One that went in and didn't shake on the way out. Then I stood, walked to the hall closet, and pulled down the locked metal box from the top shelf. Inside were deeds, titles, Eleanor's original house sketches, and the first draft of the will we'd written together in our 60s. I laid them on the dining table. Next, I called Peter, a former student of mine, now a real estate attorney. He picked up right away. "Mr. Fields. Is everything okay?" "I'm ready," I said. "To do this properly." He didn't ask what I meant. Just said, "I'll be there this afternoon." That day, I wore my best shirt. The one Eleanor used to iron with extra starch. I combed my hair. Shaved. And when Peter arrived, I answered the door not as a man on his way out, but as one who was finally standing up. We went over everything. I added clauses. Not just exclusions. Conditions. If they wanted any part of this legacy, they would have to earn it, not with groveling or apologies, but with actions that mirrored values. Community service. Mentorship. Caretaking of the land. And one clause for my daughter: she had to come back and spend 1 full week in the house, not for profit, but to live in it. To tend to it. To remember. If they refused, everything would go elsewhere. Not to strangers, but to the community that had quietly held me, people like the gardener, the grocer, and yes, Peter himself. When it was all signed, notarized, sealed, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt clear. That night, I cooked dinner. A full one. Roast chicken, green beans with almonds, mashed potatoes. I ate alone, but with purpose. After the dishes were done, I sat on the porch and wrote in the journal again. Today, I began my second life, not as a placeholder, but as the author. I didn't wait for them to call. I wasn't trying to punish anymore. I was simply writing them out of the part they'd taken for granted. And for the first time in months, I slept through the night. Not in grief. But in peace. Revenge didn't look like shouting matches or lawsuits. It looked like patience. Precision. Silence. I didn't tell them I'd rewritten the will. I didn't announce the new clauses or explain the changes. I simply waited. I lived. I began again. When Maddie called to ask if she could host another wedding in the barn, I said, "It's not available." She asked why. "It's under review," I said, and left it at that. When Tyler texted me asking if I could co-sign a new lease for his downtown condo, something about securing better rates, I responded with a simple, no. He didn't reply. Josh tried to come by one Sunday. He found the gate locked. The code changed. A polite sign read, private residence. By appointment only. I didn't open the door. They reached out, at first confused. Then annoyed. Then silent. Good. I made new routines. I joined a local history group. Taught a woodworking class at the community center. I brought old tools, shared old stories, and watched young hands craft new things. The gardener stopped by every week, and I began teaching him how to tend to Eleanor's roses properly, not just water them, but understand them. I met a widow named Claire through the library's volunteer reading program. We spoke of books and loss and what it meant to start over after the world had turned cold. None of it was done out of spite. But the result? A life that no longer needed them. Months passed. Lillian finally called. "Dad, the kid said you've been distant." "I've been here," I said. "Just not waiting anymore." A pause. Then, "Is everything okay?" "Everything's changing," I said. I knew she could hear it in my tone, something was different. Tyler emailed me later that week. A polite, vague message asking about my estate planning. I didn't respond. Instead, I wrote a letter. Not to them, but to the people named in the new will. Thanking them. Explaining nothing. And then, one by one, I returned their borrowed time. I removed my name from Tyler's insurance. Reclaimed the barn keys from Maddie. Left Josh's unopened party invitations in the mailbox with a small note, "Not this time." They didn't yell. They didn't fight. They simply faded. And I let them. Revenge, I learned, is not always destruction. Sometimes, it's restoration. It started with whispers. Tyler's new lease fell through. He couldn't find a cosigner with a credit score high enough. The downtown condo slipped through his fingers. He moved back into a shared space, something he hadn't done since college. Maddie's clients began pulling back. She tried to rebook the barn, claiming family rights. But the documents had changed. She showed up, tried to stage a photo shoot on the lawn, and left when she saw the sign, "No trespassing. Owner enforced." She cried to Lillian. Lillian called me. "I don't understand why you're doing this." "I'm not doing anything," I said calmly. "I'm simply no longer giving what wasn't appreciated." Josh tried to throw another garden party at a rented venue. No one came. The people he thought were friends had only liked the setting, the charm of the old home. Without it, he was just another 20-something trying too hard. They blamed each other. Lillian called again. Her voice more clipped. "You're punishing them." "No," I said. "I'm protecting what's left." News traveled. I had quietly updated the deed. Put the estate under a private trust, with conditions that baffled their entitlement. If they wanted access to the land, they'd have to put in community hours. Volunteer. Show up without asking for something. None of them did. Instead, they grew bitter. Maddie posted cryptic quotes online about betrayal. Tyler told his friends I was losing it. Josh stopped acknowledging me at all. And still, I did nothing. But the world noticed. Neighbors asked me to speak at the community center. I started a mentorship program for young tradespeople. Claire and I organized monthly dinner gatherings for people without family nearby. And slowly, the silence they left behind filled with warmth. With real people. With earned presence. They had removed themselves from my life. But I had decided not to invite them back. And now, they were beginning to understand. When you abandon someone who built you, they stop building. And when they stop, you start to feel the weight of everything they once carried for you. Not all revenge is fire. Some of it is absence. And it burns longer. It happened on a Tuesday. Claire and I were setting up chairs for the monthly dinner at the community center when I saw Lillian step through the doors. Her heels clicked against the linoleum, sharp and too loud for a room meant for soup and soft conversation. She looked out of place, too polished, too urgent. "Dad," she said, walking straight up to me. I nodded but didn't move. "You're early. Dinner doesn't start for another hour." She didn't smile. "Can we talk?" I gestured toward the side hallway. We stood between the storage closets and a faded corkboard covered in flyers. She folded her arms. "I know about the will." I nodded. "I figured." Her voice cracked just slightly. "Why would you do this?" I took a breath. "Because I needed to protect what your mother and I built. And the people who treated it, and me, with care." She looked away. "They're just kids." "No," I said softly. "They're adults. Adults who made choices. And I've made mine. They feel betrayed." I looked at her, really looked. And for the first time in years, I saw her not as my daughter, but as a woman worn thin by expectation. "I spent years giving," I said. "And they mistook it for a guarantee. But love without respect is just convenience." She blinked quickly, as if fighting something back. "So this is it? You're cutting us off?" "No," I said gently. "I'm closing the door that was always open, because you all forgot it wasn't owed." She looked smaller then. Tired. Unsure. "I didn't know how far things had gone," she said quietly. "I thought, they still loved you." I think, in their way, they did. But they loved the idea of me more than the reality. And when I stopped being useful, I stopped being seen. A long silence passed. Then she asked, "Is there anything we can do?" I met her eyes. "Live better. Teach them better. Earn it back, not from me, but from the world." She nodded once. Then again, slower. "I'm sorry," she said. I gave her a small smile. "So am I." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We simply walked back into the main room and started folding napkins. And that was enough. Not a reunion. Not forgiveness. Just a boundary. And peace within it. The house felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. The quiet was no longer a weight. It was a rhythm. Mornings began with sunlight through the windows and the scent of toast. Evenings ended with a book in my lap and Claire's laughter echoing in my ear from the phone. We didn't call it anything, what she and I were building. Just a friendship, a rhythm. Two people who had both loved deeply, lost deeply, and still chose to live. The community center gave me purpose. I wasn't just an old man in a chair, I was Mr. Fields again. The woodworking class grew. We added sessions. Kids who'd never held a hammer left with birdhouses and pride. I taught patience with sandpaper and discipline with dovetail joints. Every Wednesday, I brought Eleanor's roses to the library. The librarian started saving me a table. Claire brought cookies. Sometimes Lillian came too, not often, but enough. She sat in the back, watched the reading circles, never said much. But she came. One Sunday, she stayed after. We drank tea in the garden. "It still smells like her," she said. "I like to think so." She nodded. "I've started volunteering. At a shelter." I smiled. "That's good." Silence, but this one wasn't empty. Marcus, a boy from the community class, asked to help me repaint the barn. We spent 2 weekends on it, laughing, swearing under our breath when the ladder wobbled. When we finished, he stepped back and said, "She'd have liked this, wouldn't she?" I didn't ask how he knew. Some things don't need to be said. I started journaling again. Not just about the past, but about now. About small joys, finding my old favorite sweater at the back of the closet. A letter from a student I hadn't seen in 20 years. The way the rain sounded on the tin roof. And I began writing something else, a little guidebook. Nothing formal. Just lessons. About love. About legacy. About not giving everything away just because you can. One afternoon, I walked through the house with Claire. We didn't speak. Just pointed, this is where we argued, this is where we danced, this is where the grandkids used to build forts. And then she said, you made a home, you know. I nodded. I did. And now I'm learning how to live in it again. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need them to come back with perfect hearts or corrected behavior. I just needed to remember who I was before I was reduced to an obligation. And I had. I was a husband. A father. A builder. A teacher. And still. A man with stories left to write. And this one? It was finally mine. Some legacies are loud, etched in stone, sung in rooms with applause. Mine lives in a garden still blooming, in a workshop that smells of cedar and memory, in a quiet house where the windows stay open just long enough to catch the morning light. I gave my family a story. They chose how to end their chapters. But I am still writing. And the ink is mine.